you have to be aware of, the message you're sending to your dog.
If you're a dog owner, you are a dog trainer, whether you want to accept that fact or not.
Some say these two trainers were quietly in the shadows. Robert Weatherwax, last of the Legendary Lassie Trainers, from the world's greatest movie dog training family, was quietly hidden in his TV work. And Christophe Clugston, elite action canine trainer, was traveling from the sub-zero Arctic to the sweltering jungle heat, training dogs on 3 continents. But a chance meeting changed all of that. Now, Robert and Christophe have joined forces and they're breaking the silence. For the first time, the secretive and hidden world of the movie dog trainer and the science of the elite tactical trainer will be revealed. That's right, they are out of the shadows. Welcome to Tactical Practical.
On this episode, this podcast, this video cast, we're going to talk about the 4 common mistakes that can really derail your training. A lot of people are unaware that they make these mistakes, but if we tell you about them, maybe you can pay attention to them and refer back to this many times, because this is really a reference video that you can use many times. That's what we're trying to create, evergreen, as they say, evergreen information. And we have 4 really important mistakes that most beginning or even advanced dog trainers will make. And remember, if you're a dog owner, you are a dog trainer, whether you want to accept that fact or not, because the dog is learning from you, whether you think he is or not. So I'm going to start out here, and I've got 2 really big ones that happen quite a bit, and you'll see people debating on forums and on the internet about some of this, because there's a lot of confusion on this. Number 1, everyone agrees on, but they don't do it, and that is they make a mistake of not being consistent. And we've talked about this in other podcasts, but I'm going to just give a few examples. 1, if you want the dog to wait at every threshold, at every doorway before you let the dog out, you must do this. You can't say, okay, well, I'm going to do it on the back door, but not on the front door, or I'm going to do it on the car, but not on the front door of the house. You need to make this consistent, because as Robert has said many times, dogs don't have maybes, and sometimes they need to be clear cut, and it's much better life for them and for you too if everything is black or white, yes or no. So you be consistent. You have to think about this, and you really should make, if you have a family, put those little post-it stickers on the doorway and stuff to remind people dog sits or dog waits. I don't want to get into the sit thing, but I'm just saying that a lot of people like to use that, but Robert and I don't. We use stand. But if you want to do a sit, go ahead, because we're not trying to control you here on what action you have the dog do. But anyway, you've got to be consistent. The same thing with if you're going to let the dog get on furniture or chairs, sofas, beds. It has to be consistent. It can't be sometimes yes, sometimes no. That's going to make a neurotic dog. We kind of talked about creating a neurotic dog in some other episodes. Once again, all of this is a big jigsaw puzzle, and we're giving you pieces in every podcast that we do. So refer and listen to some of our prior podcasts. Can't go over all that. It would be kind of self-defeating anyway to do that. It would be here for 9 hours or something. But you got to be consistent, and consistency is with everything that you do. And of course, we talked about this last time around about the feeding schedule. If you're a normal person, it really helps, especially when we were talking about the puppies and the housebreaking and the house training. It's very important to be consistent on when you feed them. It's better to put them on a schedule so they will start anticipating when they're going to eat, and they will also be on a schedule where they have to eliminate. Now, I'm not going to go over all those things. Robert talked about that in big detail about that, and carrying the dog and the golden retriever. All these things were in that episode. So go back to that episode. I just want you to be aware that consistency means being consistent. It doesn't mean sometimes. The same thing with everything else you do. If you're working out, you got to remain consistent. If you know another language and you're not in that language community anymore, you need to be consistent on practicing it, because all these things are perishable skills. And the same thing with the dogs. These skills will go away, and if you don't have them practicing it, don't have it going on all the time, it will start to erode. That's the nature of entropy, to throw in some thermodynamics, second law of thermodynamics there. put that in there. Nobody thought I was going to get that into dog training somehow, but I just did. Anyway, so you got to be consistent and stick with it. Now I'm going to move on to my second point, that this one is the one where I see so many people arguing and so many people fighting and trying to debate about this, and that is confusion on when you should have the dog trained or you should be doing dog management. Now, as the owner, the person living with the dog, most things are dog management. I'm going to tell you that. As a trainer of many, many decades, it's still 90-something% management of the dog. It's not the training. I saw some people in England talking about, oh, they're dogs that attack the sheep, and why aren't people training the dogs not to attack the sheep? I'm like, why don't you put some damn fences up? Well, the dog should be trained. Well, and how about 5-year-old kids? They're on the 40th floor on the balcony. They should know enough not to wander to the edge and fall off. But hey, you can't trust them. You gotta put up a barrier so they don't fall off of that height. Same thing with dogs. Most things need to be management. Management, again, we started teaching you on one of our episodes about barrier. Can't go across this, can't go into this. Look that episode up, by the way. And boundaries. That was boundaries. Permission-based boundaries. Look at that. Look that up. There's a picture of Robert, and there's a X red and a green check mark, so you can find it in the thumbnail. That episode, we talked about boundaries. However, we're not going to say that that's going to happen and you're going to use that to begin with. It's better to have a fence. It's better to have an actual fence. And that's the same reason for having kennels. That's the same reason for having ways to restrain the dog, to keep the dog so you don't have something go wrong. And again, like I was at the I was in a dog park. Hey. I've got 2 dogs trying to play. Anyway, so I was at the park and I saw a competition, one of the franchise dog trainers meeting somebody for the initial consult, and they had a Labrador puppy, I'd say around 6 months old or so. And this park has ponds, and they have ducks and geese there that they stock, but they stick around because they feed them. There's mallards and there's Canadian geese and such. Anyway, so they get pretty calm about being around everybody because nothing's a real predator to them there, right? Well, anyway, so they're over, the dog, the Labrador puppy is with the owner and the would-be trainer, and they're in this area on a leash, but the dog takes off and goes and tries to grab one of the geese, and the owner is freaking out, yelling and screaming, which is normal. That accomplishes nothing, by the way, nothing, and I'm thinking, what is wrong with these people? You're taking a genetic retrieving dog that's been bred, artificially bred, to want to be around waterfowl, and there's a bunch of waterfowl here, and it's surprising that the dog is going over to the waterfowl? I mean, I almost had to restrain myself from screaming at him, because what a mistake. This guy's getting paid money as a trainer. He had to run over there, and it wasn't that fast in his running, to get over there and try to wrestle the goose away from the dog. The retriever didn't really hurt the goose, but I'm certain that the goose thought that life was over at that point. But what I'm saying is, this was a case of management gone wrong, and also a professional, supposedly, who knows nothing about the dogs that they're training and what they're selectively bred for. The same thing, if a squirrel or rabbit goes in front of a greyhound or a Saluki or an Afghan, they're going. That's what they were bred to do. So you've got to have a way to think ahead. Again, I think Robert said it one of the times, but you got to be smarter than the dog, meaning think ahead, plan ahead, be ready for this situation. So this is something that management, and the same thing again with eating, like I talked about with puppies. I said, use steel bowls. Why? Because you're thinking ahead, because they will chew those plastic ones up out of boredom or frustration, or they just do it because they want to, especially if they're in the teething phase, like we talked about. That's another one of the puppy episode. And you don't want them ingesting that plastic, number one, because it can kill them. It's frustrating to see somebody with a plastic dish that's got parts missing, because then I freak out. I'm like checking it out, make sure that the dog he's not chewing on it, swallowing any of that stuff. You don't need to freak out. You need to think ahead. You need to care about your dog, because once again, at the bottom line for everything we do is we care about the dogs. We care about the canines. This is what it's about. The people who are involved, you're the caretaker, the protector, the head honcho, however you want to phrase it, with the dog. That's who you are for the dog in the relationship that you have. And this is all about making you a better person for the dog, and having the dog be more obedient and predictable. That's really what obedience lends to. Control and obedience is predictability also. And that, as Rudd Weatherwax said, that this is what you're aiming for, and the exact quote I'll let Robert get to in a bit. But I want to point out that this is incredibly important, and this is the one I see people making the mistakes on, and even trainers. Well, the dog is not trained. Especially when you're going through a progression, because you can't train. You see my dogs doing certain things. They're not all the same point. Somebody said, hey, I was looking at your thing. It's realistic. And some of the dogs, yeah, because I didn't use them at the finished product. I showed some that are the finished product. I showed the super dog. He's the finished product on most things. I showed the one of the hunting dogs who's a finished product on some of those things. And some of the others were learning, like the Siberian Husky. She's learning. She was doing the back orbit. She's still learning, but I've showed it. So my point being, I would not count on that as being a fixed behavior in front of the lights or in the movie and stuff. It needs more rehearsal, but I am not going to let the dog go and try to do this. So I'm going to manage the situations. Again, this goes to everything, because it's all about management. Because you want to manage those situations, like we've talked about marks millions of times, the target spots that they're supposed to be on. You have to manage that by proximity. And as you know, we're the guys about location, we're the guys about duration, we're the guys about distance, like huge distances. And that's only by managing those distances to begin with, is progression. So anyway, those are two things I want you to replay and think about, hey, is there a way that I can manage this situation? Is there a way that I can make this better? Whether that be fences, kenneling, structuring the time, the around what dogs you have to manage the dog around other dogs. You have to manage. Hey, you got you got 12 dogs. Don't bring a cat in. You got to manage it. I mean, what a nightmare for the cat. Number one, and I've seen cats seriously hurt dogs. Now, I'm not going to bet on a cat against 12 dogs unless he has a tree. But I'm saying it's management. You're not going to say, well, I've trained those dogs. They're not going to. I wouldn't trust them. I would not trust them. I'd have to know you. I'd have to know all your dogs if I was going to bring a cat around 12 dogs. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Robert. He's got some things that he's going to bring up.
Yes, thank you. Since we're talking about mistakes, the common mistakes that people make, I probably should talk a little bit about the bridge, because in my book I talk a lot about the bridge. And basically what that means is you have to be aware of, the message you're sending to your dog. For example, if the dog's jumping up on you and you push him down with your hands, I've made it very clear in the past that your hands should be only for love. You shouldn't be using it for correction, because it's a message that you approve of whatever they're doing that's bad. It can be a lot of things. It could be growling and you touch your dog. It could be, the jumping and you touch your dog. You have to use something else. And you also have to be aware of the fact that, as Carl Miller said, you have to balance correction with affection. So instead of just putting your forearm out to keep the dog off you and not your hands, when the dog hits all 4 feet, that's the moment. That's the bridge. That's the time when you give the dog the reward, because that's the position that you're trying to achieve. So always keep in mind what you want the dog to do over time. Don't set up patterns that are to come and bite you in the back later on, because every time you let a dog get away with something or you send the wrong message, you're untraining your dog. That was a term that my dad used to use. You're untraining the dog. It's the same thing if you're putting a dog on a stay and then you're having them come out of the stay. You're basically untraining the stay in order to teach the come. So keep everything separate. Down the road, you'll be able to join it all together. But the main thing is that you have to be consistent in your corrections and only use your hands for things you approve of. And be very aware of the bridge. Don't just correct your dog. Let them know what's right, not just what's wrong. Now, another thing that people do is they tend to not have a really good firm grasp of what kind of voice and body language and tone they should be using, because I have a chapter in my book called Talk, Touch, and Tone. And that means a lot. I thought it was cute because it was TNT, like TNT. And I talk about the explosiveness of our hands, what we're doing with them, what we're doing with our voice, what we're doing with our body language. Talking a lot to a dog when you're training them doesn't mean a lot. You don't talk in sentences to a dog. You talk in short words, things that you want, because less is more when it comes to any verbal commands that you give your dog. Now, your body language really should be based on whatever it is you're trying to achieve. Obviously, if you want a dog to come or teach them to jump or something that requires energy, you're going to use a lot more voice. You're going to use a lot more body. You're going to be performing almost as much as the dog. I remember when I was doing a scene on Top Dog and Betty had to crawl under a fire with a notebook in her mouth. And she didn't want to do it. She was a soft dog. So I remember, I get under it and she'd get a little nervous. And then my voice would start to go back under with it in her mouth, and she'd go under the fire. And then my voice would change because she's doing it. But as soon as she got hung up or it looked like she was hesitating, then my voice has to change. I have to create a little bit more urgency. So that's something you have to do with your dog. If you want something to happen quickly, you want it to happen now, you have to have a voice that says, I want it now. And if you're doing stay or heel, you're really just slowing everything down. You're putting your foot on the brake. You're not trying to get them to do more. You're trying to get them to do less. Less pulling, less breaking their stay. It's not anything like come. You have to think of come as a separate, all these action things that you're wanting a dog to do. Consider that like a whole different attitude that you're going to have. Because, there's a static, and then there's action behaviors. And action behaviors require more of everything. And I also would advise owners/trainers to use hand signals in addition to the the voice and the body, because you get, it's a good backup. You always want to have a backup plan. In the film industry, I wasn't really able to use my voice sometimes. Sometimes I could, as long as I didn't overlap the dialogue. Like on a live show, I couldn't say anything. But say I'm doing a movie, all I have to do is make sure I don't overlap the actor's dialogue, and I could speak in between because they could dub me out later in post. So, that's something that you have to be aware of, because there are going to be times working your dog in a library to be, yelling and using all kinds of crazy motions. There are times when you need to be subtle and you need to do less. And just make sure that you establish a hand signal with every command that you teach, whether you're teaching sit, lie down, on your side, stay. Make them very distinct. Also remember about the syllable counts, because a lot of people will say lie down and sit down. Sounds kind of the same to a dog, right? So I suggest that when you have sequential commands like sit leads to lie down, you definitely want to have one syllable for sit and then two syllables for lie down, or vice versa. You want to keep everything very distinct. It's kind of like a hill, changing moods, changing emotions, changing energy levels. But a lot of it comes from you. It's not just something the dog inherently knows. They're reading your energy, they're reading your attitude, and what you are doing basically is you're leading by example, so to speak. I see a lot of trainers who are very robotic and mechanical, and their dogs work very robotic and mechanical. That's because the dog is working as a reflection of that trainer. And you want to be a reflection in your dog that is appropriate for whatever the task at hand may be. So keep that in mind. Keep in mind, where your voice is, and where your body language is, and whether your correction is at the when it should come.
Okay, so yeah, we want to keep this one succinct. That way, people pay attention to the main points. So I've gotten feedback from people because we're getting people who are commenting and sending me messages in one form or another. There's different ways to do that. The website, of course, gives you contact information, and people are using that. I have two websites for dogs, by the way. It's a top-canine.com will get you to one, and then deepdogbondmethod.com is my other one, and that elaborates more about my jungle dog and